Sorry, a little nervous here. It's been a very tense week. I don't know if you know what's going on in the United States, but probably not in the news anywhere but locally.
Oh, I think the whole world has been following it.
I haven't paid any attention to Irish news. I heard there was a vote of no confidence against our Taoiseach, like our second in command in Ireland, and I didn't even follow that scandal because I was so busy watching who was going to win the American election. It like took over my entire... But I don't know, are you happy with the result, or...
I was talking about the Masked Singer. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh.
No, yes, I'm very happy with the results. I'm happy that we got the results we have. I'm just hoping we don't have, a complete
civil war.
Civil war, to keep it
very close. I was really disappointed how close it was. I couldn't understand how it could be that close.
That night, going to sleep, I couldn't go to sleep. My wife found me on my phone reading results, trying to go to bed. She's like, just wake up and see how it goes. And
it reminded me of Brexit a lot. I was totally couldn't go to sleep, woke up and was disappointed that it was worse than I thought. And then for weeks afterwards, I walked around going, how could Welsh people not, why? I just couldn't understand. I could understand a certain type of English upper class person who might have some dreams of empire, but the average working class person just voted against their own better interests. And it just really blows my mind. But
the craziest thing is it's not your neighbor or someone across the country. It's people sitting across the table from you.
I have a friend in Wyoming, and he feels, and he worked here for a while, and he said he thinks it must be what it was like in Northern Ireland in the 1970s, whenever it really is just like the whole culture is divided, even though they're intermixed and they're such it's tough. Because he feels like that in Wyoming, that even his parents and his neighbors all are really Republican and really into a lot of issues that he, having been a bit more worldly traveled, doesn't see in the same way,
Yeah, I never thought it would be like this.
It is stuff that we've been talking about a lot with the movie, though. To segue into the movie, it was stuff that 7 years ago when we had the idea, we didn't see it becoming as huge, but obviously it's always been here in Ireland because of the legacy of colonialism and that sense of them and us and the need to see the world from the point of view of someone else. So that was a big theme in the movie.
Yeah, and also the whole thing, like when Lord Protector stands up on the stage and is going to like
using fear,
using fear to control the population. It's exactly Trump standing up there with his rallies and
when we
first
talked about it, we were talking about the kind of religious extremism of like a George W. Bush. But then while we were making the project, Trump came to the fore, and I don't recognize that at all because I don't see that as a true believer. Like Oliver Cromwell, I think, was a true believer. He really thought he was doing God's work, even if what he was doing was pretty evil. But now I don't.
Yeah, Trump is just a con man.
I don't believe he's Christian.
These cars,
I don't believe he's really Christian. So
there's no Christian. There's Christian, maybe in name, but their title, but there's no not in the heart, and that's where it counts. Let me first say I really love the film. I truly did. I went to school for animation, so I appreciate it.
Where did you study?
I went to RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology.
Okay, cool.
So my animation career never took off, unfortunately, but I get to talk to you today because of that.
And maybe it gives you a more informed way of watching things when you watch animation and stuff. Having studied it.
Yes. Oh, definitely. Real appreciation because I did hand drawn.
Oh, right.
Myself. Yeah, just some hand drawn, just a short 30-second alien coming down to Earth, and you're thinking he's going to eat the ice cream. He ends up eating the human who's serving the ice cream. But the amount of time it takes to create this little world, and people saying, well, why didn't you do backgrounds? And why didn't you do this? I'm like, because I'm drawing every single line out with my hand. And I'm shooting it on film, one slide at a time, which was pre-digital. So.
You know our pain. We also started out pre-digital. You know our pain.
We still get people saying like, "Oh, will you make a short film for me? You might be able to make it in a weekend."
Yeah,
it's amazing. It's amazing. If only you can go to everybody and ask about their profession and say, "Hey, can you, by the way, do my taxes really quick? And you build my garage? You do this
over lunch."
What's the origins of the story, and how much did you add on to that?
There was a lot of folklore that's largely forgotten around wolves because I think when they were made extinct, a lot of the folklore died out. But there was folklore from this region called the Wolf people of Ossory, and it was like stories about St. Patrick putting a curse on the people who wouldn't convert for him, and that they would become wolves for 7 years, or wolves when they fell asleep. And they weren't like werewolves, like where they were like half man, half wolf. They were just wolves, you know. But the wolves sometimes were a bit like selkies or something, where they would guide people home who were lost in the woods, or sometimes there's stories of them being able to speak, and stories of like saints baptizing the wolf and then the wolf turning into a person. So there was all these kind of mishmash of wolf stories, wolf transformation stories. The most interesting ones I thought were the ones where the wolf would leave the human body behind and leave the body almost like a kind of a spirit, and then that wolf would travel, and anything that would happen to that wolf would happen to the human body sleeping back at home. I thought that was interesting and different, and allowed us to take a different take on the whole thing.
Yeah. But in terms of like the actual folktale, it's quite a small part of the whole Wolfwalkers story, really, for us, in that like we came across that nugget of like goodness in the folktale, but expanded massively upon it. So any of the, you know, the fact of them living in a cave surrounded by like, you know, the wolf pack and all that, that's very much an adaptation.
Yeah, we kind of imagined that those people that wouldn't convert for St. Patrick had lived on and become a tribe of healers and druids, and like a kind of continuation of a pre-Christian matriarchy that I think wouldn't have been as powerful. Like, it would have been more just like a rumor than a reality.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why we latched on to the Wolf People of Austerry folktale is that we came across this idea of the hunter becoming the hunted, and how that might change a person's mind and make them have empathy towards like the enemy, towards the people that they hate, or in this case, the animals that they hate. That if you were to walk in their shoes, or walk, you know, like live a life of theirs for a day, then you might understand them a bit more, and you might not see them as the enemy. So that was the part that we kind of thought, well, maybe if a hunter becomes a wolf walker, then they would have to change their mind.
That was the nugget of it. We knew that in the history there was that time period where Oliver Cromwell determinedly tried to extinguish the wolves, like exterminate the wolves, as a way to show he had tamed the country. And we thought, well, what if a kid who comes over with their dad, and their dad is one of the hunters, who were like being given land in reward for killing the wolves. And so for them, it's a new life under this kind of Puritan colony in Ireland, but they meet the original inhabitants and they're Wolfwalkers, and then they're kind of in the middle between the two different worlds. It seemed like a metaphor for so much polarized like encampments in society over the years, over history, and even today.
So the film has a beautiful look to it. It's a really expressive, unique style. How did you come up with that style? How did that evolve?
Well, it was a continuation of ideas that were in Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea. Like, we always tried to show the two contrasting worlds, and often we used like a certain geometry kind of to flatten things out and look like medieval art. But for the town, we were going for that woodblock print style from that time period. There was a lot of pamphlets and stuff printed really quickly to kind of spread propaganda about how awful the Irish were. And we kind of wanted the English encampment, the English town, to look like a woodblock print, and kind of showed their inner world a little bit too, much more black and white, much more strict and kind of geometric and cage-like. And then we thought, if the characters inhabiting that world also had that thick outline, maybe the characters that inhabit the kind of wishy-washy, watercolor, scribbly, sketchy, lively world of the forest would have that same feeling to them. And that's what we were kind of really pushing into. Like, we tried it before, but we'd never gone this far. You know, the Tale of Princess Kaguya, for example, they had the Ghibli film. It had like really loose, rough pencil drawings. And we thought that was really inspiring, because we could have characters that were expressive, you know. And the idea that you could go from being really strict and uptight in the town, and then the more you became part of the Wolfwalkers world, the more Robin would become scribbly and scratchy and watercolory. So how she's drawn changes as she changes, goes through her emotional arc, you know. So
choosing to avoid CGI, how to make the process more complex and pretty much make your life more difficult? Or was it easy to go hand-drawn?
There's never there's no comparison, because we don't do CG, so we're not thinking, what if we were doing this in CG all the time? But we have used computers to help us make the process a bit easier. Like you were talking earlier about your early work shooting on film. Like since Secret of Kells, we drew on paper, but we scanned all the drawings in order to color them. And for most of Wolfwalkers, we were drawing on Cintiq tablets. So we drew the characters straight into the computer. So that was a lot easier to manipulate. The hardest thing, I suppose, was when we see the world through the point of view of the wolves. That wolf vision, that was probably the trickiest, and we didn't make it easy for ourselves. We worked with a guy called Evan McNamara, who's he's a director based in Dublin, and he's really good at kind of mixing new media and old media. And we knew we wanted the final look to be paper and pencil, and we wanted it to look hand-drawn, but because we wanted to be in the wolf's skull looking out at the world and seeing sense, like a black and white world, because their vision is quite colorblind, but that sense and sounds are so important to wolves. We wanted to represent that visually, kind of translate the experience of being a wolf for a visually dominant species such as Homo sapien. So we were like kind of building a CG like kind of fly through of the forest, and then printing out every page and then drawing over that CG on paper with like pencils and charcoal and stuff. And that was probably the most difficult part of the whole movie. But I don't know, I think hand-drawn animators are kind of some kind of masochists or something, yourself, like you kind of like go, yeah, that's so hard. Oh my God, he worked so hard to do a second of animation. That's badass. So there was something kind of like...
Yeah. I think like there's advantages and disadvantages to hand-drawn and to CG. And obviously, like the things that we found challenging that would have been so easy in CG is those fly-throughs and those like, moving backgrounds that like once you have the environment built, you just put a camera through there and it's really easy, and it's really hard for us to do that. But then in CG, if we were making a CG film and we wanted stuff to look like watercolor and like, all scratchy lines, then that would be the hard process. So it's much more easy. So I think like, we're trained in hand-drawn. It's what we love doing. So naturally we would make the films in hand-drawn 2D animation. Maybe if we had gone to, college and studied CG and ended up starting a college or a studio that just did CG, we'd be making CG films and going like, how do we get it to look like watercolor paintings and stuff? So it's really hard to know. I think we just chose this path, and it's the path that we're on, and you just have to roll with it.
Well, what would you like people to take away from the film?
Well, I think like we have quite a few themes running through it. All right. I think one thing that Tom and I are both really passionate about is the environmental message, and about like stopping species extinction and trying to conserve what wilderness we still have in the world. But I think on a personal, like human level, I think it's about working together to do that, not seeing other humans as the enemy all the time, like especially in certain countries, including your own, there's this polarization, and it just seems to be pushing these two groups of people further and further apart while there's a pandemic on,
Yeah.
Or
while there's ecocide.
change.
Yeah, we need to come together to heal the ecosystem that we rely on to exist, to live. And while we're getting lost in seeing each other as the enemy, we're losing the fact that our home is on fire, sometimes literally. So I hope people kind of see that it's possible to see past the differences that separate us, and that we can come together to hopefully try and save what's left of the wilderness that's being destroyed.
Yeah, and also like Robin is only told to hate the wolves. She doesn't, like, she's just been told this message that the wolves are the enemy, and she's able to learn through experience that they're not. She's able to like come to that understanding herself. So I think like in a lot of social media, people are just being told stuff these days, and they just accept it based on their own bias.
It's received wisdom. They need to go out and get experiential wisdom. Yeah.
So stop believing all the stuff you see on
all
YouTube.
The pamphlets. Stop believing all those hastily printed pamphlets by Oliver Cromwell.
Now in the form of tweets.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for speaking to me today. I love the film. I expect to hear a lot more about it throughout the year and through the award season, because I think people are going to really going to attach to this. So.
Oh, I hope so.
Great.
Thank
Fingers
you.
crossed.
Thanks
Thank you
a
very
lot,
much.
man.